before I started writing the board here, I realized that I have been writing the match week for the last couple of weeks wrong. And that, remember how in every video I talk about, let's take a look at a preview or a review of MLS Matchweek number 25, 26, 27 in this case? Well, it's been wrong. And that this match week is not number 27, and instead it's actually number 28. And when I found that out, I was kind of very frustrated, and that, for the last couple of weeks, I'm pretty sure there was a lot of people confused on why exactly am I doing a preview of week number 23 game when it just happened a week ago. So I do apologize if I mixed that up a little bit, and that, I will hopefully correct my mistake in this video. Obviously, if I do have time, which, I don't really have a lot of time since I've been very busy lately, I'm going to try to go back and fix that in the video and basically just pretty much put every single title back a week later because, like I said, this week is not week number 27. It's actually week number 28. But that being said, let's actually get into today's game, and I'm actually going to pull up the standings a little bit because I just restarted my laptop. My laptop basically just froze, so I had to restart it, and it does take a while in terms of restarting my laptop. And so let me just grab the pen here to make sure I write down the time lapse of each game. But yeah, we start off the first game between the Quakes and NYCFC, and I think this is the first time this year the Quakes have actually played the first ever game of a match week. And before I also talk about this game, let me just get my rage out of the fact that I am very pissed off. The fact that this game is going to kick off at 9:30 my time, and I literally have to wake up like I'm watching a marquee Premier League matchup that usually takes place at 9:30 in the morning. And the fact that we played the latest kickoff of the midweek game against RSL on the road, and now the league has to expect us to play the earliest game for the weekend action, and we have to fly all the way across the other side of the country to do that. Thanks a lot, MLS, in terms of that, and is another example of how MLS is once again screwing us in terms of the schedule. I mean, you have heard me talk about how I really hated this September run that we have, where we have all the tough games leading up into the playoffs, and it's almost as if MLS really do not want us to make the playoffs, and now they decided to kind of do that. So yeah, I'm obviously very upset about that, but there's nothing I can do about that, even though as much as I bitch about how the MLS schedule is kind of at times being very unfair and very injustice in terms of our team. But talk about this match between the Quakes and NYCFC. Well, for the Quakes, you would think that they should at least, at a minimum, get a point out of this game. I mean, I know that coming into this game, they're playing against an NYCFC team that is unbeaten in 6 games and actually had their winning streak snapped in the last game by TFC as they only drew 1-1 in that game. But before that, they of course won 2-1 against New England, won 3-1 on the road against Vancouver, won 2-1 against the Red Bulls at home, and won 1-0 against Columbus at home. While the Quakes, of course, they lost 1-0 on the road in the last game, and that, before that, they won 3-0 against Orlando City, won 3-1 against Vancouver, lost 4-0 to LAFC, and lost 2-1 to SKC, and that the Quakes are coming into this game having lost 4 straight road matches, and that is definitely not a recipe in terms of trying to go to Yankee Stadium and expect to get at least a point out of this game. But like I said, with the way that I know the next game is against Atlanta United on the road, and I'm pretty sure that if there's a miracle happen, and if I pray very hard to the soccer gods to give us a point on the road against Atlanta, most likely we're not going to get anything out of it, and that we could really come out of this mini free game road trip once again with no points whatsoever, which could really damage our playoff hope. So yeah, this game is very important for us. I mean, I guess the only good news I can say about this game is the fact that we are going to get some of the players that was doing international duty back in this squad, and that some of the guys that we also had that was supposed to be on international duty, so guys like Kashia and Vako, those guys, I think they will be a little bit more fresh in this game. Well, actually not Kashia, because he did play the full 90 minutes in that one, but Vako, I think he might be a little bit fresh in this game because he only played for about 25 minutes. But then again, NYCFC are also going to get some of their starters back in this game, and that they're going to get their defense back into to shape in this game. So yeah, I'm not really that confident with the way that, despite the fact that we are going to get guys back in the starting 11, it doesn't really mean that we can get an easy victory or get something out of NYCFC on the road when they are also getting guys back in this game. So yeah, I just hope that we can get at least a point out of this, so that, maybe, for the remaining of the season, as I said before, as long as we can get a point on the road, and if we get all 3 points at home, I think we should be able to make the playoffs. And that in the last game, despite the fact that we lost against RSL, at least the good news is we did not lose a lot of ground to any of the team, because almost all the team around us actually lost. But that being said, moving on into the next match is going to be Chicago and Dallas. So for all these teams that is currently in the Western Conference, that is kind of like jumbled up between 2nd through 8th place, all of these teams, whenever they see this kind of matchup, which is a team that is part of the team that is jumbled up between 2nd through 8th, and that they're playing an Eastern Conference team, yeah, they are definitely rooting for Chicago to able to knock off Dallas, so that, they might take advantage of them losing and gain some points on there, or the fact that if they do lose their game, at least they know that Dallas themselves also lost that game, so that they didn't lose any ground whatsoever. And it's the same case when you have teams that is like near the bottom of the Western Conference, and teams that most likely is not in the playoff picture, against teams that is in that 2nd through 8th spot, and that for those teams, you just hope that they, of course, would be able to lose that team that is in 2nd through 8th spot, so that they can at least gain ground, or not really lose any ground in case they lose at the same point. So, as a Quakes fan, I'm really hoping Chicago can win this one. And, coming into this game, Chicago did drew 1-1 to Columbus. And Chicago themselves are also kind of in the playoff race, although they are kind of barely holding on in terms of the playoff race, as seen here in the standings. They are currently 10th in the standings and have played 30 games and have 34 points, and they are 5 points back of the refs who have a game over Chicago in this one. And that, they're playing a Dallas team that is currently 7th in the standing and just above the red line, and just 1 point ahead of the Galaxy in terms of the cutoff line right now. And that, in other words, it's a big game for both of these teams in terms of trying to either make the playoffs or stay above the red line. And the last 5 games for both of these teams, Chicago drew 1-1 to Columbus in the last match, while they, of course, did lose 2-1 to New England on the road. They did win 2-0 against Philly at home, but lost 3-2 against Portland on the road, and then won 3-2 against Montreal. For Dallas, they won 3-1 against FC Cincinnati, and have also won, not 3-1 actually, it was actually a 5-1 win that they got against their hated rival Houston Dynamo. And then they, of course, drew 3-3 in that incredible come from behind kind of game where they were down 3-0 and able to brought it back to 3-3 to tie it up. They did lose to the Galaxy 2-0, and they also won against Minnesota 5-3 in the game. And that one thing I kind of start realizing with Dallas is that they are actually scoring a lot of goals in the last couple of games. And that when you look at a Dallas team, which I always say that this Dallas team tends to have a very decent defense, but one of the big issue and one of the reason why they're not considered one of the best team in the league is that they have trouble in terms of goal scoring. But it seemed like that is not the case in the last couple of games, as they have got 8 goals in the last 2 games, 11 if you go back to that free draw that they have with Montreal. So this is a team that started to find their goal scoring form, and maybe that of course can help them carry them into the playoffs. I mean, we know they obviously have a very good defense, but now if they can of course score many goals in games, then they could definitely be a very dangerous team, and could be a team that might be sneaking to be a dark horse kind of team if they of course do make it the playoffs. But of course they need to of course continue to sustain that in the next couple of games, and we'll see if they can do it against Chicago, who they definitely want to win this game so that they can keep hopes of maybe making the playoffs heading into the end of this season. But moving on into the next match is Atlanta and Columbus. So Atlanta currently is second in the standing, I believe. Are they second or third? I think they are. No, they're actually third in the Eastern Conference, and they are currently 3 points behind Philly, although they do have a game in hand over Philly in that second spot, and 6 points behind NYCFC for that top spot, while they're playing against a Columbus Crew team that is 8-7-15, and most likely their season is about to be done, because they are still way back in terms of the standings, and I think they're even probably up for elimination this week, depending on what the result going to go against them. But in the last match, they drew 1-1 against Chicago at home, while Atlanta lost 3-1 to Philly away. And in the last 5 games for both of these teams, for Atlanta, as I mentioned, they lost 3-1 to Philly on the road. But before that, they actually had a 4-game winning streak coming into that game, where they of course won 1-0 against Orlando City on the road, won 2-0 against Portland on the road, won 2-1 against NYCFC, and won 3-0 against the Galaxy. And that Atlanta have definitely looked very good even through the tough stretch that they of course were in the last 5 games. And as for Columbus, they drew 1-1 against Chicago, won 3-1 against FC Cincinnati in the Hell is Real Derby, but they did lose 1-0 on the road against NYCFC, drew 2-2 against Columbus, and drew 2-2 to FC Cincinnati in the other Hell is Real Derby. Now, Columbus is a team that they definitely have started to find a little bit stability, and that this team clearly is playing a lot better than what they were a couple of months ago, when they were just heading into a death spiral, and is pretty much the reason why they're not going to make the playoffs this season. However, they have been drawing a lot of games, and that they are about to head to Atlanta, a place that a lot of teams aren't able to get off 3 points or even get a point out of Atlanta. And knowing Atlanta are definitely going to be very upset with that 3-1 loss that they had against Philly in the last match, they definitely want to try to get some points in this game so that they can maybe hopefully get that second position back from Philly, and that they maybe could catch NYCFC in terms of that top spot. And also, it's going to be very interesting to see whether or not if Joseph Martinez would continue his goal scoring streak that he has. He currently have scored 13 straight games in MLS, and although his record did kind of broken, if you want to count his record in terms of goal scoring in all competition, because he didn't score against Minnesota in that U.S. Open Cup final, his goal scoring streak is still intact in MLS, and that if he does score another goal, and if he continue to score goals in this latter part and continue the streak, there's definitely going to be some big discussion of whether or not if he is actually could be the new world record in terms of the most game with at least 1 goal in a match. But moving on into the next match is Montreal. So Montreal gets a free win of the week as they play against FC Cincinnati. And again, I know I am being very harsh to FC Cincinnati, and this feels, I'm pretty sure FC Cincinnati fans are probably very, very kind of ticked off the fact that every single week, whenever I talk about them, I always say that, it's your opponent is about to get the free win of the week. But it is kind of the case. I mean, they have not won a lot of games this season. Although one thing I will say is one of the 5 wins that they had this season is against Montreal, and that, Montreal, of course, they definitely did not take advantage of the free win of the week last time when they were on the road against FC Cincinnati. And in fact, I think Montreal was the team that was able to end FC Cincinnati horrendous run of form, where they just not only they had like a long losing streak heading into that game, but they also have not scored a goal in a very long time, and they were also the team that kind of broke that drought. But in terms of the last game for both of these teams, well, Montreal, of course, lost 3-0 against DC United away, which is a huge loss to them considering the fact that they're playing at home and playing a very weak DC team. While FC Cincinnati, they lost 7 out of the last 8 match, and the only game that they did not lose was that first Hell Israel derby back in August 10th when they drew 2-2 against Columbus. And then in the last 5 games for both of these teams, as I mentioned, Montreal lost 3-0 to DC at home, which was a huge L that the Impact suffered. They did win 2-1 against Vancouver at home, but lost 2-1 to TFC on the road. Drew 3-3 against Dallas and lost 3-2 against Chicago on the road. For FC Cincinnati, there is definitely a lot of red in terms of the last 5 games, as they lost 5-1 to TFC, lost 3-1 to Dallas on the road, lost 3-1 at home against Columbus, lost 4-1 against NYCFC at home, and drew 2-2 against Columbus on the road in the first ever Hell Israel derby. But like I said, this is a free win for Montreal, and that, for the Impact, a team that is right in the mix of the playoff hunt and trying to get in above the red line, trying to get the last couple of playoff spots. This is an absolute must-win for the Impact. If Montreal does not win this game against FC Cincinnati, not only there's going to be a lot of laughter in terms of the fact that FC Cincinnati, as bad as their season is, they actually did a sweep against Montreal this season by winning both of these games. But I just think that if Montreal does not win this game against FC Cincinnati, I think their playoff hope is all but done. I mean, I know they're only 2 points back of New England for that 7th spot, but the thing is, New England has a game in hand over them, and that as long as they continue to lose games like they have been doing for the last couple of months, I just don't see how in the world this team is going to get above the red line and able to make it to the playoffs as one of the lower seed. Now, speaking of New England, the very next match that I'm going to be talking about features New England versus Orlando City. And I say last week where this was virtually a 6-pointer for both of these teams, and that if you want to say which match is the playoff implication or the desperation derby of the week, this is exactly that. Because Orlando City, who's currently 9th in the standings and are 4 points back of New England, currently have a record of 9-8-13, and that, I think in many ways you could say that in this desperation derby and in this playoff implication, this is an absolute must-win for Orlando City, and that Orlando City need this win more than New England. However, New England, their record is 10-9-10, and then in terms of the last match for both of these teams, New England, of course, lost 2-1 on the road to NYCFC, although that was a very controversial game, especially what happened with the red card in the 8th minute with Delamay getting sent off. And that, the good news is at least he's going to be back in this game because his red card was rescinded during the middle of the week. While Orlando City, of course, drew 2-2 against LAFC at home, which, anytime you get points off of LAFC, it's not a bad thing. But the thing is, they were virtually playing an LAFC B team, and they had the lead for majority part of the game until they, of course, gave up that late goal to LAFC to only get a point out of that game. Now, in the last 5 games for both of these teams, besides the 2-2 draw that Orlando City had in the last game against LAFC, they lost 3-0 to the Quakes, lost 1-0 to Atlanta, drew 1-1 to Orlando City, and actually won 1-0 against SKC, and this should be a green color, not a purple color. That means that a team, of course, have draw in the resort. But for New England, they, of course, lost 2-1 against NYCFC, as I mentioned. Drew 1-1 against TFC, won 2-1 against Chicago, drew 1-1 against the Red Bulls, and drew 3-3 against Seattle Sounders on the road. So they haven't been that kind of... They haven't been as in form as they were earlier in the season, and that it's clear that ever since they gone on that 11-game unbeaten run, things are kind of like they're started to kind of come back down to earth and started to only able to get a draw out of some of these games, and also lost a couple of these matches. But like I said, this is a massive 6-pointer for both of these teams. If Orlando City does win this game, they are right back into the playoff picture. And if New England lose this game, and let's say Montreal does win their game, then Montreal all of a sudden find themselves above the red line, and New England find themselves down below the red line. So New England definitely have a possibility in terms of dropping below the red line if they lose this one. And yeah, I mean, this is a massive 6-pointer for both of these teams. And you know, if I had to say who needs this game more desperately, I would say it's clearly Orlando City in this case. But yeah, moving on into the final game before I switch the board to look at the last 6 games of this match week is no doubt the game of the week between the Union and LAFC, and potentially an MLS Cup preview in this match. So the Union is coming into this game with a record of 15-6-8, while LAFC is coming into this match with a 19-6-4 record. The Union, of course, were at the top spot after they beat Atlanta 3-1 at home, but unfortunately they got dethroned from that top spot by NYCFC because NYCFC was able to take advantage of those game in hand to go above them, and that they are currently, I believe, 3 points ahead of the Union for that top spot in the Eastern Conference. Well, for LAFC, you know, they are still top of the Western Conference, but in the last 3 games, they definitely look very human, and that they drew 2-2 against Orlando City away. Now, the thing about the last 3 games is that the last 2 games that LAFC have played, they did not have Carlos Vela in their starting 11, and I think maybe LAFC is going to bring back Carlos Vela for this game, considering the fact that it is against a team that is one of the best teams in the league, and that, you know, they also have a chance to potentially clinch Supporters Shield depending on what other resort is going to happen around them, and that, you know, if other resort goes right to them, they of course would clinch Supporters Shield. But, you know, in the last 5 games for both of these teams, and for the Union, as I mentioned, they won 3-1 against Atlanta, won 3-1 against DC, lost 2-0 to Chicago on the road, but then win 2-1 at home against Houston before winning 5-1 against DC United on the road. While for LAFC, as I mentioned, how they have been looking a little human in the last 3 games, well, they drew 2-2 on the road against Orlando City, lost 2-0 to Minnesota at home, which is the only league loss that they have suffered at home so far this season, and they drew 3-3 against the Galaxy in this game before winning 4-0 against the Quakes and winning 2-0 on the road against RSL. And it's going to be interesting to see when Carlos Vela does get back in this LAFC team. Would this LAFC team just immediately look like that team that just absolutely dominate the rest of the league, and that LAFC just kind of like on another planet to everybody else kind of team? Because, you know, as much as I'm not that concerned with the fact that they are winless in 3 games, and that, you know, this is an example of how even the best team in the league will always have their struggle and have a couple of part of the season where they are going to go into a slump. They got to make sure that that slump should not go on for a long time, because if this slump does continue, then there is definitely going to start to be some doubts in terms of heading into the playoffs, and that, you don't want to head into the playoffs if you're on a winless run, and that you want to head to playoffs at least with some momentum. But it's not going to be easy against a Union team that has been pretty good at home this season, and that they want to try to back up what they said last week after the Atlanta match, where they said that they are ready to take on LAFC, and almost saying that, kind of like just saying, bring them on and see how it's going to go. So let's see if they can, of course, back up that talk that they had and able to beat LAFC in this game, or whether or not if LAFC can, of course, end this little mini slump that they had and get back to winning ways. But that being said, let me now switch the board and look at the last 6 games of this match week number 28. We move on from talking about the most important game of this week to now talk about the least important game of the week between the Whitecaps and the Dynamo. Now, the reason why this game is so meaningless is because one team, which is the host, is eliminated from the playoffs, while the visitor Houston, is about to be eliminated from the playoffs. And it's interesting how yesterday I actually read an article on MLSsoccer.com talking about, can the Dynamo actually make a late surge in terms of getting back into the playoff picture? No. They are not. Like, even if they do make a late surge, I think they're just so far behind in terms of the playoff picture, and with so little game left, there's just no way in the world they, of course, will get into the playoff picture. Like, unless if they win every single game from now to the rest of the season, I just don't see how in the world are they going to even get close to in terms of trying to be back into playoff conversation and maybe even go above the red line. But in terms of this match, Vancouver, of course, coming into this game with a record of 6-9-15, while the Dynamo currently have a record of 10-4-15. Vancouver, of course, lost 3-1 to NYCFC at home. That kind of felt like an eternity ago. While the Dynamo, of course, won 2-0 against Minnesota at home. And in the last 5 games for Vancouver, they lost 3-1 to NYCFC, as I mentioned. Then lose 2-1 to Montreal on the road. Lose 3-1 to the Quakes on the road. They did win 1-0 against DC United at home, but before that, they lost 3-1 to Portland on the road. Now, for Houston, they, of course, won 2-0 against Minnesota at home. But then before that, they were still at a mix of just a horrendous run that they were on before this victory that kind of snapped out of their winless run. They lost 1-0 to SKC on the road. They lost 5-1 to their biggest rival, FC Dallas, on the road. Then drew 2-2 against Colorado at home before losing 2-1 against the top team of the top team of the Eastern Conference, that is the Philadelphia Union, on the road. And like I said, there's really not much I can say about this game other than the fact that, both of these teams are just kind of like playing for pride. And I'm going to say maybe Vancouver is going to be the favorites in this game, because Houston has not been able to do anything on the road, and that I don't even remember the last time they were able to get a road victory this season. Probably the last time I can think that Houston actually got a road victory was probably in the beginning of the season when they did beat Colorado early on in the season. But other than that, that's the only road victory that I can really recall that they actually got a win on the road. Like, they didn't even get a road win against FC Cincinnati, which I've been kind of saying that should be the free win of the week, and they didn't even take advantage of that. But moving on into the next match is Portland. So this is one of those match again where it's an East versus West kind of encounter, and this won't be the last East versus West encounter that we are going to be seeing this match week. And also, this is the first game of the Sunday action, as we're going to have 5 games on Sunday. And the first one is between the Timbers and DC, and like I said earlier about the East versus West kind of clash, unless you're the Portland Timbers, all those teams in the Western Conference that is jumbled up between 2nd through 8th place are definitely going to be rooting for DC to able to knock off Portland, so that either they of course gain some advantage and gain some point on Portland, or the fact that if they do lose their game, at least they don't lose ground to the Timbers in terms of the playoff race. But coming into this game, the Timbers is 13-4-11, while DC is 11-9-10. Portland, of course, won 2-1 against SKC at home, and right now I believe they're currently 6th in the Western Conference at 43 points. But keep in mind, out of all those teams that is bundled up in the Western Conference, they're the only team that actually have one game over all those teams that is currently in 2nd through 8th place. While DC, of course, they won 3-0 on the road to get themselves in 5th place of the Eastern Conference, and they're currently at 42 points right now, although they're currently tied with TFC in terms of that 5th spot, or tied for that 4th spot, as TFC, of course, jumped all the way up to 4th right now. In the last 5 games for both of these teams, Portland, of course, won 2-1 against SKC. It was a come-from-behind victory that got them all 3 points in the last match. Well, they won 1-0 against RSL at home. They did lose 2-1 to Seattle on the road, or at home in the Cascadia Derby. Then lose 2-0 at home against Atlanta before winning 3-2 against Chicago at home. As for DC, they won 3-0 on the road against Montreal, which was a massive victory for them considering the fact that they have just been on a very bad slide before that. They lost 3-1 to Philly on the road, lost 2-1 to the Red Bulls at home, lost 1-0 to Vancouver on the road, and this was a game that I really thought DC was going to collapse, and the fact that they are probably not going to make the playoffs, because when you lose, it's one thing to lose on the road, but it's another to lose to a team that is basically the one of the worst team in the league and the worst team in the Western Conference right now. They did win 2-1 against the Galaxy at home, but that was a game that they play against the Galaxy that didn't have Zlatan, and then they lost 5-1 to Philly at home, which was also a very embarrassing result. But yeah, I think when you look at this game, both teams, certainly they have a lot of stake coming into this game. Portland, if they can win this game, they could potentially propel themselves all the way up to 2nd of the Western Conference, depending on the resort that is going right now, and that they still have that game in hand that they have, which I believe the game in hand that they have, they're going to use it in the next midweek, as I believe in the next midweek they have a game that is going to be at Providence Park. Well, for DC, they are certainly trying to, despite the fact that they've been playing very bad for the last couple of weeks, and really for the last couple of months, they're somehow still kind of just dangling around the middle of the pack of the Western Conference and trying to get themselves into the playoffs. However, keep in mind, just because they're dangling themselves in the middle of the pack of the Eastern Conference doesn't mean that there is still not a possibility that they can drop out of the playoff race, and that they're only 5 points above the red line right now. So this is a crucial game for both teams, and it's going to be interesting to see who exactly is going to win this one. But moving on into the next matchup is TFC. So Toronto is going to be playing against Colorado, and this is the Robin Fraser Derby. And the reason why it's called the Robin Fraser Derby is because the current head coach of Colorado, Robin Fraser, is going to be going back to Toronto, where he was the assistant coach for TFC, and that his team is definitely on fire right now with them winning 3 in a row, while TFC, of course, drew 1-1 against NYCFC away. And that, in that 3-game winning streak that Colorado has, and in that first 3 game that Robin Fraser took over, where basically he won all of them. They, of course, won 2-1 against the Galaxy in the last match, albeit it was a very controversial win. They did win 2-0 against Seattle and won 2-0 on the road against the Red Bulls in Robin Fraser's debut. They did lose 2-0 to RSL and drew 2-2 against Colorado, but that's when when they still had Connor Casey as their interim head coach. For TFC, they drew 1-1 against NYCFC, won 5-1 against FC Cincinnati, drew 1-1 on the road against New England, won 2-1 against Montreal at home before drawing 2-2 against Columbus on the road. And that TFC actually have gone 6 games unbeaten so far, and that, with that 6-game unbeaten streak, they are able to climb themselves all the way up to 4th place in the Eastern Conference. But like I said before, there's still a lot of questions surround this team of the fact that, once they get to the playoffs, can they actually go on a deep run? And that, they definitely have the talent to potentially go on a deep run in the Eastern Conference and can be a dark horse kind of team. But the question is, can they do that? And so far, when you look at these last couple of games, you definitely can see the potential that they could definitely be one of those dark horse team and a team that you do not want to play in the playoffs. But at the same time, they in some of those crucial moments where, it's up for grabs for them to get all 3 points in the game, they weren't able to do that. And in the last game against NYCFC, it was a prime example of it, where they had the chances to get that second goal against NYCFC, and they missed a penalty in the second half that would have give them the second goal and give them the lead that they could have got all 3 points away from Yankee Stadium. So the verdict is still on this team, whether or not if this team can, of course, go on a deep run. And, playing against Colorado, this is definitely not an easy kind of game because, as I mentioned before with the Rapids, not only this is a team that has been coming kind of a spoiler playing kind of team where whenever they play against a team, they always want to try to get a win against that team, even though they themselves is that win that they, of course, get will not benefit in terms of them making the playoffs, and that they're pretty close in terms of getting eliminated from the playoffs themselves. But they love to play the spoiler road, and they like to spoil other teams' chances of making the playoffs, and especially the fact that Robin Fraser, he knows this TFC team very well, and he was just the assistant coach with this team for majority part of the season. I will definitely not be surprised if Colorado can pull off an upset in this game, and that, TFC's got to be very careful about this one and not treat Colorado as a team that they might be right near the bottom of the Western Conference, but they're definitely not a team that you want to take very lightly. But moving on into the next match is Minnesota. So the Loons is playing against RSL in this match, and I think this is probably the only matchup where it's between two teams that is currently in that logjam of a Western Conference between 2nd and 8th place. And both of these teams also play in the middle of the week, and they kind of had different fate in terms of the result that they had in the middle of the week. For Minnesota, they took a huge loss against Houston on the road as they lost 2-0 to them, while RSL took a big win against the Quakes at home and propelled themselves all the way up in the second spot of the Western Conference. And in terms of the last 5 games for both of these teams, for Minnesota, they of course lost 2-0 against Houston on the road, as I mentioned. They did win 2-0 against LAFC and become the only team to be able to get all 3 points against LAFC on the road. But before that, they lost 1-0 to SKC on the road, drew 1-1 against Orlando City at home, and won 1-0 against Colorado. And one thing that I've been seeing with Minnesota's these last 5 games is that despite the fact that they did get a couple of wins during this stretch, goal scoring has been a huge issue with this team in the last 5 games. And you realize that besides this game between them and LAFC, where they of course scored 2 goals in that game, and those 2 goals really came in a span of 4 minutes, and it just came by a guy that decided to have a Hollywood kind of story in that game. They have really struggled in terms of goal scoring, and that the goal well has really dried out in this team. Well, for RSL, they of course won 1-0 against the Quakes. They did lose 1-0 on the road to Portland, but they win 2-0 against Colorado before losing 2-0 at home against LAFC and winning 3-0 against Seattle. So RSL have relatively been been good in the last couple of matches, but the reason why they've been relatively good in the last couple of matches, and people are saying that they're one of the hottest team in the league, is because a lot of those games was at Rio Tinto Stadium. And we know that when this team go on the road, they do not usually get the result as they would get at home. So with them being on the road against Minnesota, you would think that Minnesota, of course, should be the favorites in this game, and that the Loons playing at home at Allianz Field, which they have been very good so far this season at home. You would think this should be 3 points against RSL. I'm not quite so sure about that, considering, like I said, the goal scoring is a big problem for this Minnesota team, and that, that loss against Houston, I really hope that loss did not really just trigger this team into a potential collapse in the remaining part of the season. Because we know that this team has a very tough schedule. Like, besides this game against RSL, they still have to go on the road to play both the Cascadia team. They have to play Portland, I think, after this match, and then they have to play Seattle on the final game of the season. And oh, by the way, they still have to play LAFC again at home, and I have a feeling that while they of course beat LAFC on the road, LAFC definitely wants some revenge and definitely wants their payment for handing Minnesota all 3 points when they of course were playing at home. So the Loons, despite the fact that you would think that they of course are favorites in this game, and that most likely they of course could pick up all 3 points in this, they also got to realize that while they are the favorites, maybe the favorites coming into this game, they got to make sure they win this one. Because if they do not win this one, and let's say if they get a draw out of this game, or even worse, get a loss in this game against RSL, then things could really go south for this Loons team, and that teams around them, if they were able to pick up resort, they're going to drop down the table like a stone. And I mean, I'm very concerned in terms of this Minnesota team, and that whether or not with this tough stretch that they have in the last couple of games, and that the reason why I'm actually very concerned with Minnesota is that they're kind of in the same situation as my Quakes team is in, where the latter part of their schedule is going to be very tough, and you just wonder, with the Quakes, as I said about them, it's going to be the same thing with Minnesota. If they do not pick up points at home that they need to do, and able to get at least a point on the road against those tough teams, this team could easily find themselves outside looking in the playoffs. And this is a team that's been in the playoff picture for most of the season. But moving on into the next match is going to be the Sounders. So the Sounders is going to be playing against the Red Bulls, and this is another East versus West kind of clash. And I know since this week we have a lot of East versus West clash that is between teams in the Eastern Conference that's kind of like in the playoff picture, and also the against Western Conference team that is part of those team that is in that logjam of a kind of standings. It just kind of makes you wonder that, if you're a Western Conference team, you're basically are rooting for the Eastern Conference team to get a win, because you want that Western Conference team to lose, so that you, of course, maybe gain some spot in terms of that tight playoff race that is going on in that conference. Whereas in the Eastern Conference, you want the Western Conference team to beat the Eastern Conference team, so that we can basically take advantage of some of the points that Eastern Conference team that lost to the Western Conference team. I mean, I know it kind of sounds very complicated, but yeah, it's very fascinating to see, and it's also going to be interesting to see at the end of this week whether or not who is going to be come out as the better conference. I mean, so far with all these East versus West kind of clash, it's been the Western Conference that has been the more dominant side, but and I know as a Quakes fan, I hope that this is going to be one of those weeks where the Western Conference could be just a little bit kind of lackluster, and that the East can really take over once again like they did for the last couple of season in terms of this interconference matchup. But going back to this matchup between Seattle and the Red Bulls. So Seattle did lose 2-0 to Colorado on the road, and the Red Bulls, they also lost 2-0 to Colorado on the road. Colorado basically played both of these team in their last 2 matches. Although the Red Bulls, when they lose to Colorado, they didn't lose them on the road, but instead lose to them at home at Red Bull Arena, which has just been, this season for the Red Bulls at home has just been very uncharacteristic of them just dropping so many points at home. Like, usually when you think of the Red Bulls and at home, it's a place that is pretty much a fortress, and when you're the visitor team to go to Red Bull Arena, most likely you're not going to get anything out of it because the Red Bulls are so good at home. But that is not the case so far this season, and that they've been definitely dropping a lot of points at home. Now, the good news is they are not playing at home in this match, and that they're playing on the road, which in some way they have been kind of a little bit better on the road this season than what they have done at home. I mean, I know the record doesn't say it because their home record is still better than they are on the road, but seeing how they play on the road this season, they just kind of look more comfortable playing on the road and look like the better Red Bulls team when they're playing on the road compared to when they're playing at home. But the bad news is they're playing against a Sounders team that they're going to get most of those star-studded players back in the starting 11, and hence that's why they lost 2-0 to Colorado away, because this wasn't Seattle that played Colorado. It was Tacoma Defiance, the USL feeder team of the Seattle Sounders that basically played that game against Colorado, because they were basically missing everybody during the international break, and there was no team that got hit harder in the international break and players missing due to international break than the Seattle Sounders did in this game. Now, in terms of the last 5 games for both of these teams, as I mentioned, they lost 2-0 to Colorado. They did win 4-3 against the Galaxy, did win 2-1 on the road against their hated Cascadia rival Portland. Drew 2-2 against the Galaxy in a game that they probably should have lost if it wasn't for that goalkeeping howler that gifted them the equalizer. And then they lost 3-0 on the road against RSL. For the Red Bulls, they lost 2-0 at home to Colorado, lost 2-1 on the road against their hated intercity rival NYCFC. They did win 2-1 against DC United, drew 1-1 against New England at home, and lost 4-2 against LAFC on the road. And, if I have to pick a favorite and who most likely could win this game, I would say Seattle might win this one because, with their starting 11 back intact, I think they should be able to squeeze out a win. But, for the Red Bulls, they can, as I said, they seems to look much better when they're playing on the road, and I definitely will not be surprised in terms of them getting a road win. And especially they are right now find themselves in 6th in the Eastern Conference and currently about 2 points or 1 point behind TFC for that 4th spot. There's no doubt that they want to get this win so that they can at least have get back into that spot where it's the last spot to get home field advantage in the first round. Moving on into the final game of this match week is the Desperation Derby. Now, I know earlier I said the Desperation Derby between New England versus Orlando City was really the Desperation Derby of the week. But I'm now going to say this is the Desperation Derby of the week because both of these teams are literally looking on the outside in terms of the playoff spot, with the Galaxy currently in 8th place and have 42 points with a record of 13-3-13 and 1 point back of FC Dallas for that last spot of the playoffs, while SKC, their record is 10-7-12 and they are currently 6 points back of FC Dallas in terms of that final spot of the playoffs. Although I think SKC had an extra game in hand over Dallas. No, actually, all 3 of those teams that is right now fighting for that last spot of the playoffs is playing the same amount of game. And, when I look at this match, I have a feeling that not only this match, the winner of this match can still keep their hopes in terms of making the playoffs, but I think the loser of this match potentially could miss the playoffs, and that there is no doubt that one of these teams could potentially miss the playoffs this year, and that right now, I know some people will say it most likely it's going to be SKC, because if they lose this game, then their playoff chances might be all but done, since they could potentially find themselves 9 points back with just 4 games left to go, and that they have to win this one. But I think if the Galaxy lose this match, they of course will find themselves only maybe at worst 4 points back of Dallas for that last spot. But you got to also keep in mind that the Galaxy, they have only won 1 out of 7 games, and that if they do lose this game to SKC, this is just going to continue that downward spiral that they are in right now, and it just gets to a point where even with some easy games that they have coming up in the schedule, as long as they continue this downward spiral that they are in, I really have a lot of concern with the fact that the Galaxy are not going to make the playoffs, and that we are once again seeing one of the biggest collapse we have seen this season in terms of the team that's been in the playoff picture for a long time, but ultimately have a late season collapse and now find themselves looking on the outside in. Now, in terms of the last 5 games for both of these teams, the Galaxy lost to Colorado 2-1 in the last match, and I know that was a very controversial game, and that the Galaxy clearly should have not lost that one, and I kind of talk about during the review. There's nothing Galaxy fans can do about that, and that they just gotta have to move on in terms of that very controversial match. And that before that, they lost 4-3 against Seattle on the road, drew 3-3 against LAFC, drew 2-2 against the Sounders, and won 2-0 against FC Dallas at home. Now, for SKC, they took a crushing loss to Portland in the last match, where they were leading 1-0 in that game heading into the last 10 minutes, and they absolutely dropped the ball and give up 2 goals in the last 10 minutes to lose 2-1 in that game. They did win 1-0 against Houston, and won 1-0 against Minnesota, won 2-1 against the Quakes at home, before losing to Orlando City 1-0 on the road. And that during those 3-game spell, you would think that kind of spell gave them hope that they could potentially get back into the playoff race. But that last game against Portland, where it looked like for sure that they were on their way with 4 straight victory to really just on the verge of getting above the red line, they weren't able to do that. And now, because of that loss and the fact that that was such a crushing loss for them, can they recover in this game against the Galaxy and able to get 3 points to once again get themselves on the verge of going above the red line? And as for the Galaxy, like I said, they got to stop this slump that they are on, and that this is the worst time right now to be in a slump if you're a team that is part of that log jam that is in the Western Conference. And if they do not stop this slump and continue this downward spiral, I will not be surprised if the Galaxy is going to be missing the playoffs for the 3rd season in a row. But that being said, there you have it. That is pretty much it for the review or the preview for this match week. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all 12 of these games, and let me know in the comments below what's your prediction for all 12 of these games. But yeah, hope you guys enjoy this video, and I will see you guys next time.